tonight's lead-in topic, once again, and I don't want to say top 5, but 5 changes that the comic industry could make that would make me more interested in reading current and get me, pique my interest, make me consider going back and trying out some things. And I should say, every now and again, I go back in and I just look and see what's happening, and I'll sample things in digital, and things just don't tend to grab me. Like, every now and again, there'll be like one singular book that's kind of away from everything else where I'm like, okay, that first issue or two was pretty cool. I'll eventually get back to that and look at it. But I used to be invested in the worlds of the big two, in the continuities. And yes, good stories are not as important as continuity, but DJ, I don't know if there was one like brilliant book that everybody agreed, you know, like your current ongoing Batman or your Spider-Man or whatever, like, yeah, I'd come back just for like that one seminal run, I guess, but it's so easy to just wait until it's done and look at it and trade, right? Like, if it's just one book. I kind of want to be invested in more than that with one of the big two if I'm going to, like, actually walk into a comic shop and buy new comics again.
Yeah, that makes sense. So in your height of comics, how many were you pulling each week?
Monthly. It's hard to say weekly because comics came out monthly, right?
Okay.
So,
okay.
It always kind of changed and fluctuated. You never knew what was going to come out on a particular week. My average for about 8 years was 20.
Wow. Okay. So yeah, you would need a lot of books that you were into to get back to that.
I spent between $150 and $200 a month on comics yearly for at least 7 or 8 years.
Wow.
Or monthly, I'm sorry, for at least 7 or 8 years. Yep. And the least it ever was like 10 or 12. And that wasn't always big too either, of course. I had a lot of IDW and some booming stuff in the later years when Power Rangers started and all of that. But anyway, so without further ado, here are my 5 things. So like I said, the first thing would be Axe, and this is on the DC side. I wouldn't necessarily want this for Marvel, because Marvel going to just non-canonical things where it's not a continuing 616 shared universe, as it were, is weird just because of tradition and the way those stories tend to be told. I don't think they do that as well now as they used to, and I've always cared more about Marvel as a universe than I have about any particular character at Marvel. But this for DC would get me back into comics in general. Make the entire DC line out of continuity stories. Like I said earlier, like things like Batman White Knight, or we just reviewed Wonder Woman Dead Earth, or the Earth 1 books, stuff like that. Those, in my mind, particularly the Batman stuff, have been the best offerings in the last decade from the big two, with the exception of some of the stuff that was going on at Rebirth early on. But I mean, we're getting to, I mean, that was like 6 years ago now when that all started, which is nuts. Like I still think of that as like New 52 kind of soft rebooting as being, I don't know, like a couple of months ago, and it's not, you know, that was quite a while back. And now I guess they've reset back to the continuity they had even before 52, from what I've heard.
Wow.
But yeah, if and I don't mean that it would have to be like you know, non-DCEU movies, DJ, where every book would have to be a standalone character and nobody could cross over. You could still do big DC things. It's just the separate books wouldn't have to talk to each other. They wouldn't have to have anything to do with each other. And I don't think DC or Marvel is very good at keeping their continuity straight between books anyway anymore, which I'll talk about a little bit later as well. And so why not just let like each writer have their own take on stuff and basically do Elseworld stories? And they don't always have to be big, gimmicky, crazy concept things. Like, it's kind of what Marvel is now. Marvel is just one big Elseworlds at this point. It's like, what crazy combination of things has never been done before? Let's do that, but it'll be all crazy and shocking because it's actually in continuity. And it's like, well, you guys have jumped the shark so hard. You broke your universe like, 9 years ago. I don't want to say 9 years ago, because that was back during the Marvel Now days, and that stuff was fantastic. But I don't know, I guess 4 or 5 years ago, they kind of broke the world with just, let's do let's combine every crazy thing you can think of. Why hasn't this been done yet? Because it's stupid. That's why. Can you make everything work? Yes, but are you starting with your heart in the right place? No. That's my point. And so anyway, but DJ, you could still do like not crazy gimmicky, like Robin 3000 or Speeding Bullets or Superman Red Sun. Like, not everything would have to be that kind of wacky concept, but you could just do, here's a Justice League story that we would never really tell in mainstream continuity, but somebody's got this really great idea for a Justice League story, and it's kind of a standard mainstream regular Justice League story, but it just doesn't affect anything before or afterwards. And so maybe like up to a certain point you can kind of imagine what things are canonical, but it's basically like a lot of the old DC direct-to-video animated movies, right? Where there's not a grander universe with them, but you know enough about what the status quo for DC usually looks like that you can enjoy one. If we went to that, and that was most of the books that we were putting out, I'd come back. I'd come back for that.
Sweet. So are all the rest of the 4 all like one thing that would bring you back, or does it have to be at least a couple?
Yeah,
so you said that would bring you back all just by itself.
That all by itself, at least to DC, yeah. A couple of these, it would probably require 2 of the 5 things, and some of them are contradictory. Some of them you couldn't do together.
Oh, interesting. Okay, I'm excited. Good tease.
So the second thing is, and you guys let me know what you think about these ideas. The second thing is an alternative notion, DJ. So you couldn't do this on top of the first thing. This is kind of the opposite of it, but it will also be a thing that would pique my interest depending on how it was handled, and particularly who the writers were, if you got some new blood that seemed interesting, or if you brought back some people that, or, you know, talented that I've loved from the past that were actually interested in DC superheroes again, because maybe you gave them you know, more carte blanche to do what they wanted to. Right now, let me say this, DC has been kind of, DC and Marvel both really, kind of touting up what I think of as kind of workman writers, kind of B-C list guys, and I don't want to throw anybody under the bus or, you know, say anything negative about these guys, because a lot of them are fine, like decent writers, but they're kind of being bumped up to try to look like you know, powerhouses or A-list writers, or like brilliant minds, because they've lost all the guys that, or most of the guys anyway, that were keeping a lot of readers there. And so now we got to pretend like, you know, a lot of these guys that we have in-house that have just been kind of serviceable and do a lot of fill-in issues or have had their own, you know, kind of smaller books are our big heavy hitters now. And I'm sorry, like, these are not horrible writers, but they're not your Matt Fractions, they're not your Greg Ruccas, like, you know, your Joshua Williamsons and your Tinians and these guys, like, they're not cutting it. They're not even, you know, your Dennis Hopelesses, like, I mean, and he's written a couple things actually that I think are really quite good. So he's more in the hit or miss category. But like, these are guys that are fine, but they're not, you know, they're not big heavy, and they've been there a long time, and they've continued to be kind of the same caliber. So anyway, so who you bring in, it does kind of matter. But alternatively, to go to just out of continuity stuff, I'd say do New 52 the way it should have been done in the first place. Do an honest DC reboot. Let writers and artists do what they want with books once you've greenlit them, and don't, you know, kind of lord over them like editorial did, and then don't put the popular stuff in a bubble. So if you're going to do a true honest-to-God reboot, Batman does not get to have his entire history in 5 years. And Green Lantern does not get to have its entire history in however many years. Do an actual real reboot. Take real risks with all of that, and probably don't pattern the whole thing after mid-90s Marvel.
Mid-90s Marvel was a fun time, but we did it. We had it. We don't need it again.
Yeah. And it kind of fell apart pretty quickly, so anyway. Yeah. John Ty says Tom King is a heavy hitter, in my opinion. I think he's massively hit or miss. I think you got to put him on the right things. And even then, sometimes he'll be on a thing that I think he's right for, and then later on, it all kind of falls apart. And I don't know with Batman just how much of that was his fault, but that book gets to an unreadable place that I've never ever seen a thing that I touted up so hard. And by the way, sorry for being long-winded, but I haven't talked new comics in a long time, and just a lot of things are coming back and washing over me right now, where I'm like, I have so much to say about this. Let me move on. So my third thing, DJ, is look at it. So if you've got to have heavy continuity, and admittedly, that is a thing that does keep me in comics, like I said earlier. I'm saying all or nothing. Get rid of it entirely and let people just do their own thing, or do it correctly, right? So look at 80s DC and Marvel, particularly, well, no, both of them. I was going to say particularly DC, but both of them, as the blueprint for continuity. So it should be possible to understand what's happening in Spider-Man without reading X-Men or Venom or whatever the big event is. And in Perfect World, we just quit doing big events all the time. But you should also be rewarded for keeping up with everything. So if you want me to buy every book, then you've got to reward me for keeping up, even if I don't have to follow books. Ergo, if Batman, for instance, is currently on Planet Apocalypse in his book that month, he should be there in Justice League that month also. And in the 80s and 90s, in the early 90s anyway, we started to get worse about this through that decade, but like 70s and 80s, they made it look easy. They made it look flawless. Like, there were occasional continuity mistakes, but they were trying and you could tell, and we just don't care anymore. But we, in a really gimmicky way, kind of insult readers and try to come up with easy, cheap ways to try to make you read every book like everything matters. But I can't even trust that a character is gonna be where I'm told he is in this book in this other book. So where's the continuity? Why am I bothering? Don't tell me it's a living and breathing universe and then only give me that on the surface. The fourth thing is draw the line at $3.99. So DC in the early 2000s, circa 2011, had this policy that they put on all their books. They made made a big deal out of it. We draw the line at $2.99. It lasted 6 months. And all their books were $2.99. They weren't going to go past that. People were complaining about $4 covers, and they were like, well, this is a way to compete with Marvel. It was a great way to compete with Marvel. We all knew it wouldn't last. Saying we draw the line at $2.99 was like saying Superman is dead. It's going to last 6 months. And now we're past the threshold where I'm comfortable buying singles regularly, especially because the quality is very often not there. I'll crack an issue open on a digital service where I don't have to pay for individual issues, and I'll get 3 pages in and I'll go, I don't care. This is not grabbing me. I'm not interested, and I won't keep reading. And boy, I don't want to spend $5 on a comic and have that experience, right? And I said for a long time, like back when we made the documentary about comic shops, Midwest in Panels, back in 2014, we put the movie out in 2015, so it's been almost a decade now. I said, I asked a lot of people on that trip about $3.99, $4.99 cover prices and how they felt about how the price was going up and kind of artificial inflation. And you heard both sides of the argument, and we put that in the movie. About half the people said, and this is owners, store owners, and readers, half customers. Half the people said it's a lot of bang for your buck as far as, art and stuff. It's worth it. And about half the people said, if it gets past $4, I'm probably done. And that's where I was. I was like, I don't want to pay $5 covers across the board. Occasionally, when you have extra pages, when there's an oversized issue, I get $5. But not all the time. And we're looking for excuses a lot now to pad books out so you can charge $6 to $10 for them. Also, print enough so that every slightly important key issue isn't immediately scalped by people to the point that nobody can get one if they didn't put it on your pull list. This goes along with that same thing. It's tangentially related. For instance, there should have been enough of Ninja Turtles Last Ronin #1 to go around. That book was impossible to get, and it shouldn't have been. That's how I feel about it. But yeah, so expense is a thing. And I also, let me say this, would be okay with the $4.99 cover, more okay with the $4.99 cover price if the big two were only publishing like $20-30 a month. And that segues me to my final change that would make me interested in coming back. And again, DJ, this would be probably in combination with one or two other things. Make it possible for a person to buy a whole company's line monthly again, especially if continuity is supposed to matter. Now, I don't mean it has to be insanely cheap. I don't mean that somebody who's just, going to high school and has a part-time job at the Quick Trip should be able to buy your entire company's line. I do feel like professionals with a salary should maybe be able to buy your entire company's line. You know what I mean? Like, I think it would be reasonable to expect $150 to $200 a month to buy your entire company's line. And maybe you think I'm cheap for saying that, but that's how I feel about it. So some of this is cover price. More of this is sheer number of issues that you're putting out and stuff that is completely inconsequential, that's not even very good, where you're just trying to pad things out and make it feel like I have to have everything when I don't. Have fewer books, and then give me incentive to buy everything. Stop doing goofy, sensational premises just because they've never been done before, like I said earlier with Marvel, when clearly nobody's heart is in it who made the book. Stop it with Venomverse and Gwenverse, and again, Dark Crisis on Infinite Earths. No more gimmicky tie-in minis for events. Stop nickel and diming people. If the stories are good and editorial can keep up with continuity between books, enough readers will want everything. You'd keep more of a loyal base in the long run, even if in the short run you'd lose a little bit of money. Invest in your readers. And no more turning every successful run into 10 new books or a massive event it wasn't supposed to be in the first place. If Snyder's got a Batman story to tell, let him tell it, and don't make every other writer on Batman books have to make a giant event out of it when the first issue sold record numbers. We are penalizing creators and compromising their vision because they're too popular. It's preposterous. Stop it. So those are some of the things that it would take to get me interested in it again. I think with the exception of to be or not to be as far as continuity goes, DJ, most of those things would have to happen for at least one of those companies before I would have a lot of respect for them as companies and the way they treat their readers and the way they treat their writers and artists again. That's how I feel about it. I have strong feelings about the way this whole industry has gone, and it's a lot of the reason that I'm not there anymore. And so I'm not pulling punches tonight, guys. This is how I feel about the whole industry, and I'm using it as an excuse to soapbox, I realize. But as I started writing this, I was like, oh, I have thoughts. Because I told Connor, I was like, I mean, I can think of 2 or 3 things right away. I don't know how easy it'll be to come up with 5. I could have done 15, man. Like...
Yeah, no, that was great. I enjoyed listening to that. That was a great video, all by its own. And
thanks.
Jason, you should cut this out and use it for a video.